Hello everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Cyber Threat Intelligence in Action, Effectiveness of CTI Programs and Wish Lists for the Future, Results of the 2017 Cyber Threat Intelligence Survey, Part 2, sponsored by Anomaly, Arbor Networks, Domain Tools, LookingGlass, Rapid7, and Threat Connect. My name is Carol, author of the SANS Institute, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Dave Shackelford, SANS Analyst, Instructor, and Course Author; Rebecca Brown, Threat Intelligence Lead for Rapid7; Travis Farrell, Director of Security Strategy for Anomaly; and Alan Thompson, Chief Technology Officer at LookingGlass. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface. We will be answering them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Dave. Hey Dave, I'm thinking you might be muted.
Oh, yep, sorry about that. I was just chatting away, having the best of times. So, hey, so let me just start over again. Hey guys, thanks again for being here with us. As I was just saying, we're excited to be presenting part 2 of our annual Cyber Threat Intelligence Survey, and excited to be joined by some of our awesome sponsors who have lots of great input and experience in the field to share with you guys as well. And so I'm going to go ahead and just sort of get us cranking away from this incredibly awesome intro slide. This is who I'm going to be joined by today: Travis, Rebecca, and Alan. And so you'll be hearing from each of them in turn before too long. But I'd like to kick us off talking a little bit about just what's happening out there. And as I was saying in our first half, which we gave yesterday, this is actually pretty exciting overall to see that organizations are really making a push to, to some degree invest in CTI, but at the very least allow it to sort of progress. And we saw that the numbers are up. So this year we have 60% absolutely doing CTI to some degree, and another 25% with it on the roadmap. So that's a pretty big number. I mean, all that leaves is 15% that are sort of either undecided or haven't really figured out what their strategy is, or for whatever reason definitively don't have a plan to do this. But I think we can tell the trend is headed upwards, so that's great. We're also seeing, maybe even more importantly, that the use of CTI is leading to some definitive improvements in security capabilities across the board. So we had almost 80% come back and tell us that security and response capabilities are doing better than ever as a result of using CTI, and that's a 14% jump from last year. So again, really, really big areas that we saw just major growth in. And so what I want to spend time on in this webcast is focusing primarily on things like skills and the teams that are involved, and really the implementation specifics around CTI. So there's just so much to cover. And so what we wanted to do was just sort of split it up, and I think we've got some really exciting information for you guys here today. So let me jump on into the next slide, if I can get my... There we go. All right, so I'll give you guys just a quick overview of who was a part of our program. So we always like to get a really broad mix of professionals from across the industry, and we got exactly that this time. And it's always nice to see the SANS audience is just so representative of the entire spectrum of not only verticals, but large, medium, small organizations, global organizations. So we had a nice representation in terms of big organizations. Certainly 38% had 2,000 to 50,000, another 19% was even bigger than that, so 50,000 or more, and that's a large organization, obviously. We had another 43% sort of on the smaller side, so 2,000 or fewer, which is really important actually, because, hey, guess what? Everybody's a target. The size of the organization doesn't inherently mean that you're more or less likely to be targeted. Everybody's got sensitive data, and the attackers know this, so it's important that all of us are collectively coming together regardless of size, and we got that, so that's nice to see. What we also saw was a really nice mix of industries. So we saw a lot of government, and we expect that. Certainly also the same case with banking and finance. I think those are likely to be the top industries responding for some time to come because they've been invested in CTI a bit longer than many of the others. But this year we saw a lot of technology companies come into the plate with some information. We also saw, for the first time really, cybersecurity as an industry stepping up. So we saw vendors, we saw consulting firms, we saw lots of other areas starting to emerge, along with the usual mix of other places like healthcare and manufacturing and telecom and so on. So again, a really nice broad mix. But what this represents to me, I mean, I'll almost take the vertical out of it. I think it's important. But you're seeing a blend of maturity levels too. So you're seeing people that have been at it for quite some time. You're also seeing some that are probably just now getting started and starting to sort of dip their toe into the pool of CTI and figuring out where they want to go. To sort of move towards the real meat of this presentation, the job roles are a little different than in the past, still along the same lines. What we really tend to see is a mix between security, sort of hands-on folks, admins and analysts, and then their management, as well as IT ops and hands-on folks and their management. And the mix was just a little different this year. We had a little bit higher security admin and analyst roles and a little lower on the security management side. And we had sort of an even split in IT and ops management with just a blend of everything else under the sun. And so we did see a few shifts here, but I think it's really sort of representative of the fact that many organizations are splitting up some of the duties that are associated with CTI between security and other parts of the organization. And so they all have some interest in this, and I think they're being asked about it because we're all being attacked. So it's the nature of the game today. So pretty interesting to see that blend. So let's get into the real meat of the survey, and this is something that I presented in the first half too, because I think it's sort of relevant to everything in this discussion. And that's who's using this stuff, who's producing it, who's consuming it, how is it being produced and consumed. And so we sort of debated this when we were putting together our survey and decided that we would represent this as either raw data, so you're either getting raw data or you're producing raw data or both, or you're really getting sort of the polished data, so you're producing that data or you're getting that data or both. And so if you take a look at this graph, it's pretty easy to break down. On the left-hand side is the raw data, and what you'll see is that the biggest part of that was in the both category. So it's people that feel as though they're producing some of their own, but they're also consuming it. And what that tells me is that we're starting to find new ways to blend that into the organization, because raw data, you've got to do something with that. It's not as though you can either produce it or consume it and just have it auto-magically tell you a story. You've got to have tools that can accept it. You've got to have correlation capabilities that can parse it and do things there. And so seeing that percentage, seeing those numbers, is really encouraging, because what it tells you is that we're really starting to come up with better use cases for just standalone data sets, and some of this really shook out in some of the first half where we saw different formats and things coming out. So I again encourage you guys to go check that one out, just if you haven't seen it. We also saw people that wanted more of the polished data, and I think you're seeing a lot of consumption on that side, certainly because we're getting vendors and getting feeds and getting sort of reports from a variety of sources that have been analyzed for us. So if you've got expertise in some of your service providers or maybe sharing groups that you work with, they're going to be able to distill some of that perhaps better than you, and that's a great reason for you to want to consume this data in a way that really makes sense. So again, great stuff. This is nice to see. I think we're seeing a nice mix of both the raw data and the reports. And it looks as though we really almost have sort of a mix across the board of people that are both producing and consuming it. Not a lot of just producing, though. Most people are consuming at least something from somewhere. And where is that somewhere? So where are we getting this stuff when we are getting it? And these are numbers that sort of hold true and have been holding true for a few years now. And I think this, again, also makes sense knowing the state of the industry and what's happening in it. The number one contender here in terms of sources for CTI is sharing groups. So we're talking about community or industry groups like ISACs and others that come together and collectively produce and also share this data. And those usually tend to be the more mature industries and groups. So this is going to be your financial services. It's going to be the defense industry and some of the government sectors. And so there's a lot of growth in those areas. There's a lot of sharing groups being developed and coming along, but they share. That's what they do. So I think that makes sense that we're seeing more people get that data from them. Coming along behind that, though, we have a pretty even mix. If you look at the next 3 categories, they're really close, and that's going to be internal stuff. So we're developing our own and sort of pulling it from internal types of sources. We're also pulling intelligence feeds from security vendors in general, and we're getting open source or public CTI feeds. So this might be things like, DNS listings or, sort of blacklists or that kind of stuff. It sort of all tells a story to me. To be honest with you guys, I look at this and I think, hey, what's the pattern here? And I looked back over years past and really tried to do some comparison and contrast. If there's a pattern, that pattern is we're going to take anything we can get. If you look at the numbers for buying feeds from intelligence vendors, so in other words, I go to a CTI vendor that they specialize in this stuff, that's not far behind either. So it's not as though you can say, hey, that's way down the list. That's 45% of the respondents saying, absolutely, we're engaging and making actual purchases of that type of data. It's valuable to us. And so I think we're seeing people take whatever they can possibly get a hold of and budget for. And it also suggests to me that maybe we don't know what the best sources are yet. And that wouldn't surprise me. I think, again, there's a lack of maturity in the space, and it's probably going to take a few years before we really start seeing sort of where we get our best data from and how it really tends to be used. So this is the volume graph, and it's just a bunch of data. So what you're seeing here, and this is, I think, a really important set of data that we have to take a minute and sort of talk through and think about. What this means is that you're seeing variance of the numbers of indicators or threats that are showing up. So if I say, hey, I need threat intel, can I really handle 10 million indicators a week? I think there's a very small percentage of organizations that could even begin to handle that. And in fact, if you take a look, and this is of course at the bottom of the graph, you've got 1.7% saying, yeah, I get that many. And note that none of them felt they could effectively utilize this. So, hey, get more data, but we have no idea what to do with it. And that, again, doesn't surprise me. Now you flip down to an organization that, for instance, takes in 1 through 10 threat indicators on a weekly basis. That's 22.2% saying, yeah, we can really do something with that. There's a manageable level. Guys, it shouldn't surprise you at all to see that the numbers for effective utilization drop precipitously as we increase the number of threat indicators. And really the top line here may tell the story more than anything. People have no idea how many threat indicators they're getting. And a third of the respondents said, yeah, we don't know. And we feel like we can effectively utilize something in there, but we really just don't know. I think this is another one that sort of tells the story of not feeling mature and not really knowing exactly how we're going to best make use of this type of data overall. So this is interesting to me. It doesn't surprise me necessarily, but I think it is interesting that if you read between the lines here, I mean, it's easy to just say more indicators, less certainty in how we use the stuff. But I think there's sort of some hidden meaning in here as well that implies we sort of don't know a lot of things too, and we feel like things are being worked with, but we really just don't know what that shakes out to yet. So the volume, I think, is something to keep an eye on over the coming years too. How are we using this? So we know we're feeling as though it's more effective, but how are we really using the data? And what we saw consistently, and again, I think this really speaks volumes to the evolution of CTI, because we've seen this sort of march happening over the past several years as we've been doing this. It's security ops and it's incident response. So it's people that are tracking down, maybe doing threat hunting type of activities, and it's also people that are responding to incidents in the environment. And I think that's the name of the game, folks. It's find indicators, get indicators that make sense, look for adversarial behavior, right now as fast as possible and try to head things off at the pass. So if I get some good intelligence, of course I'm going to try to make use of that as quickly as I can and ideally prevent the attack altogether, but certainly sort of prevent it from getting any worse if it has hit me to some degree. So right there at the top, yeah, sure, 70% plus are all saying, hey, that's really our top use cases. Right below that, you have another 3 use cases that sort of make sense too. So, helping us understand what's coming and what's going on, that's an awareness tactic. So that's us feeling as though, hey, we've got a lot of things going on. How can we sort of educate? How can we sort of educate people and try to figure out what's really happening out there? What kinds of attacks? What kinds of threats are really our most pressing, and what can we do about that? So threat management right there is in the mix too. I think those go hand in hand. And then the last one, that purple line, is vulnerability management. Sure, of course, right? We want to know what types of things these guys are targeting. So are they looking for patches? Are they looking for, missing patches, I should say, or configuration errors? So much data, so many great ways that you can start tying this stuff in. I don't think anything here is a surprise, and you can just sort of go down the list, and again, threat hunting called out explicitly was right there in that list as well. So, lots of stuff, and again, I'm not going to spend too much time. You guys should really sit and digest this data for yourself, but I think those top bars are not surprising, to at least to me, and I think to most of the other analysts that I've worked with. So we got some great real-life examples, too. We asked people, and I was really excited about this, by the way, so you might be able to hear me being excited right now. We asked all of our respondents to just sort of rap with us and give us free-form responses on things they were doing. And that's exactly what you see here. This is a list of some of those sort of categorical responses, and we got a lot of them. So I tried to sort of, distill it down a bit to give you some of the big ones. But I mean, it's everything from threat modeling to detecting phishing emails to sort of bringing about a better data set for awareness teams to use and leverage as part of their scenarios and cases. And, that really helps us in all these areas. So I'm going to pause for a minute. I'm actually going to flip over and ask one of my co-presenters. I'm going to ask Alan, if you're there, what's your perspective on some of these CTI uses? I mean, are you seeing the same things? Are you seeing things that I didn't list here?
Yeah, I definitely think this is a good list of technical uses of CTI. I think, as the survey results showed, lack of funding was one of the key problems about, taking advantage of CTI going forward. And I think if you consider lack of funding is really driven by executives in the boardroom about what business impact potentially it has. So, for example, if we saw supply chain, brand protection, executive protection, that kind of thing, then it starts to resonate, hey, this is how CTI really can impact my business, and so therefore I need to prioritize that funding so that I can support those business focus. So I think, in the future it would be great to see some of those business use cases of CTI really starting to resonate, because it'll help improve funding.
I think that's a great point, actually, and certainly every security officer I speak with is desperate to find ways to help with funding. But I think tying security more intimately into the business and how it operates and where we can really provide feedback loops and sort of more proactive behaviors, that's a huge win for everybody. And CTI, I think, is one of those rare cases where it should be able to do that, especially as we get better and more mature at handling it and taking it in and sort of applying it in different ways. And so that's great. Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I think that's a pretty strong point to make all the way around. So great stuff. Thanks, Al. I appreciate that. So let's move on here, since we've got so much data to sort of crank through. And as I said at the beginning, one of the big hallmarks of this year's data set was the feeling that we're getting better, we're doing better in prevention and detection and response by virtue of using the CTI data. And here's some of those numbers. Anytime you say, hey, we feel like we're doing better, we have a real bad habit of going, well, how much better? And I'm kidding, of course, because it is the right question to ask. But I think what you're going to find is that people feel like they're and having had conversations, people feel like they're sort of making a guess at it, and that they're not really as good at tracking some of the metrics as they'd like to be. But they gave it a great, great try, and so this is what shook out this year, looking at those percentages of improvement. And so if you look at the sort of upfront piece, the security, which we categorized as being able to protect, in other words, block stuff, or detect it rapidly within the environment, the biggest numbers we saw, of course, no shocker, are going to be unknown. So going back to my point, people just aren't sure where they're at. So they said, yeah, we feel like we are, but we're not 100% sure how much. But the next number that came along was 51 to 75%, and that is massive. So 51 to 75% improvement, that's almost roughly a fifth of the respondents felt they fit that category. That's incredible. And the two categories right below that are 26 to 50 and 11 to 25. So look, I will say, as a long-standing security practitioner, if you came to me and said, I feel like we've had 10% improvement in our protection and detection capabilities as a result of using CTI, I would be ecstatic. The fact that people are giving numbers anywhere close to 10 and all the way up to 75 is nothing short of astonishing. Now, are they making those numbers up? Who knows? But this is cause for excitement, and we should at least herald the fact that CTI is apparently really something they feel good about, and they're willing to put those numbers out there. On the response side, we had similar scenarios. Now, granted, not quite as high. So we had 11 to 25 and 26 to 50 as the bigger categories. But what we really saw was, once again, across the board improvement. So people were a little more modest on the response, but frankly, people are feeling, that response is just this incredible, Sisyphus level of the battle that they're fighting. It is. It's tough. Response is tough. And so the fact that we're getting better at it altogether, again, is, I think, really a big win for us. So we asked about the effectiveness in 2017. I mean, how has it improved? I mean, we got some percentages from folks, but how has it really improved things for them? And what we saw coming back, and by the way, this is consistent and has been consistent for the past several years. So once again, we saw a consistent trend right at the top of the list with improving visibility into threats and sort of telling us what's happening in the environment with attack methodologies. What are these guys doing? How are these guys attacking us, and what are they trying to do? And that's exactly what they told us last year, too. We've seen this sort of movie before, if you will, and I think that's the right answer, really. I think that is a way that we should be looking for improvement, better introspection into our own environment and our own behaviors, and ultimately helping us figure out what's happening and what they're trying to do. Beyond that, we see improvements in ops. We see the ability to detect things we didn't know were coming, and that is always helpful, especially since none of us know all of it. And beyond that, of course, you're going to see things like preventing breaches and reducing time to respond. So reducing time to respond, just getting better overall, all those kinds of things make sense. But when you really break it down, I think just helping us feel like we know better what is really going on in the environment, great stuff. Who can deny that as being a really useful sort of benefit? The management tools, I feel, are still sort of emerging. And what I mean by that is a lot of people are still kind of resorting back to the SIM. I'm not suggesting that that's a bad thing at all. So especially when you look at the number of folks that felt they had an integrated GUI. So, hey, how am I really sort of pulling it all together into one pane of glass, as they say? The SIM is sort of the central platform there. I don't necessarily think that's bad, but what I also don't think is that you're always going to find the SIM being the best fit. I think people fall back to it because they know it, and I think a lot of that's because of the perceived cost or time or lack of capability or maturity of tools that aren't the SIM. And if you look at the mix here, it's pretty broad. I mean, we saw a lot of people saying, hey, network traffic analysis tools were sort of the useful ones for us. And actually, in that category, you saw a pretty even split between, sort of using it all by itself or also integrating into a GUI. If you go down a couple, what really shocks me on this one, and I'll just put it right out there, the number 4 category for this list is spreadsheets and things like email. And, you know, I guess I shouldn't be shocked that the fact that we've still got spreadsheets out there for managing some of this stuff, it is what it is, but that is not the way to succeed in the long term, and I really hope to see that number go away, if possible, but definitely go down more and more and more as the years progress. So yeah, most of this is SIM and some network tools and some intrusion monitoring platforms, and a mix of other things there. I mean, if you take a look at like commercial CTI platforms, that's coming up, right? So we saw that emerge a little bit more this year. We also saw some homegrown stuff. It seems like people are still building tools themselves and providers that are helping, but really the SIM's the big winner in this category still today, and that's something we've sort of seen a lot of in the past years too. We need to integrate those feeds, and I think that is one of the reasons why tools like SIMs are still very prevalent, because the SIM vendor you know, typically has lots of hooks into other places and sort of allows for data to come in. And it seems easier, I think, to integrate a feed into a SIM versus trying to go get something different and then make it all play nicely together. But if you look at the intelligence feeds and how they're getting integrated in, vendor-provided APIs are the #1, and so that's not surprising, or custom APIs. So seeing those at the top of the list, again, given what we just saw, doesn't surprise me at all. We're also seeing commercial or open source vendor or threat intel platforms in third place here, which I think we'll see grow. I think you're going to see standalone threat intel platforms emerging more and more. And then sort of beyond that, you've got service providers and integrations and, you know, all sorts of other things too. Is it useful for reporting in particular? So we had over half respondents say that they felt like their CTI reports were pretty good, but quite a few, I mean, we had a lot of people actually come back and tell us that they needed to clean them up a lot. So we only had 14% that were like, excellent. Most people don't feel that confident, so they're not willing to put their necks out there and say, you know, these are incredible. But 51% saying they're good, I think that's a pretty reasonable thing to look for today. We had about 32%, so I'm in third, saying, hey, you know, we got some data, but we're not quite sure what to do with it. And, you know, 1% that said this stuff's useless. And I expect a little bit of that. You should too. That's a pretty small number overall, and I think, at least I'll speak for myself, I think we can live with that. So let me ask my co-presenter here. So Rebecca, if you know, 51% of respondents are saying that CTI requires some manual cleaning or cleanup, you know, what are some ways that you've seen organizations clean and analyze this stuff to make it more useful?
So I actually think that it's good that so many people are actually working with this intelligence that they're consuming. A lot of the reports aren't written specifically for your organization or for your use cases. So there does need to be that additional layer of analysis where you're understanding how this is relevant to you. Some of the ways you can do this are, first off, if it's a report format, whether it's coming through a vendor portal or something that's open source, make sure you read the whole thing. There's a tendency to kind of jump to IOCs or even auto-extract the IOCs, and that can be good for time saving for operationalizing it, but you still need to read it and understand whether this is relevant to your sector, to the technologies that you use, and whether it's current enough for you to act on it. In addition, if you are doing any sort of automated correlation or integration, from, you know, a source that you trust and that you know is providing you good information, at the very minimum you should have some sort of blacklist to make sure that you don't accidentally block or alert on something like google.com. But I think it is actually really good that people are working with the intel and understanding how it's relevant to them.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? I like the positive spin too, Rebecca. That's nice, right? Like, it's not cleanup, it's analysis, right? Let's go with that. I'm down with that as a as a way of looking at things. Now, hey, look, I think you've got a great point, right? Wouldn't it be a shame if somebody jumped to page 4 in the report that had all the IOCs when page 7 said, by the way, none of these are relevant to your particular case? So I think you're right. I think we really do need to be a bit more thorough and take that time. And ultimately what that means is that we need people that understand this stuff, first off, and we need people that have the time and have some dedicated roles to be able to do this. And as with anything, that is still a struggle, and I'll talk to that in just a moment. So moving along that continuum of satisfaction, here's sort of the breakdown of very particular areas where we said, hey, look, are you very satisfied? Are you satisfied generally? You know, what's the overall satisfaction? And so we broke this chart down with that overall satisfaction rating, and the relevance of the threat data and information feel good to us, right? So we are feeling like that's helping us out. And from there, cleanliness and quality of data, 76%. And I think that jives really well with what we just talked about. You've got roughly 3/4 of the people saying, yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, it's coming to us, and yeah, maybe we need to clean it up, but the people that really felt like they needed to clean it up was not that high. So timeliness was good, visibility was good. If you look at the very satisfied category, though, the top one here was timeliness, and right behind it was relevance. So timeliness and relevance, I mean, what else can you ask for other than the, sort of just general quality? But the relevance and timeliness are huge, and if those are pretty good, and you're in the 20, roughly 23% on both those, I'm pretty excited to see that. I think that means that people they're starting to see real improvements in these areas, and that's just phenomenal. So good stuff, and really, again, nice to see. But it's not all, unicorns and rainbows, as they say. We definitely still have some things holding us back, and right at the top of the list, as we've seen every single year, is the lack of skills, the lack of people that have those skills. We just cannot seem to really get the right staff in place here, and of course, lack of funding. I mean, everybody needs more funding, and I think we saw a jump in that, by the way, this year. The lack of funding went way up, and I think, honestly, I've thought about this one a lot, and unfortunately, it's hard to get all the context in the world from a survey, but based on what I've seen in the industry, what is actually about is people wanting more in the realm of CTI. They're asking for more. They're trying to build more. They're trying to get more tools. They're trying to get more people. They're trying to get more feeds. They're trying to get more than they ever have, and that's going to immediately equate to a lack of funding if it's something net new for the industry or organization. So I'm not disheartened by that at all. I just think excuse me, I think it means that we've got people asking for more. But I think the bigger problem here, and you can shake out the rest of these as you will, but the bigger problem is that skill set. And so, hey, Travis, if you're there, man, I mean, what are the things people can do to deal with this? They don't have the staff. Is there any way they can work around this?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think that's something that's not going to go anywhere. Obviously, it's been the top issue on the survey for the last few years. So really, it comes down to, in my opinion, coming from a practitioner's perspective, is getting people engaged, getting them involved in, sort of the threat intelligence realm, trying to pull people internally into that world that maybe have some of the underlying skill sets that are useful in that area, and then really just trying to make the best use of what you do have. Try to lean on automation as much as possible. The use of APIs ranked very highly previously in the slides, and I think that's reflective of this sort of lack of staff, basically. So people are trying to figure out, how can I make sure that the few eyeballs I do have are being able to be used as effectively as possible, and they're not sitting there doing repetitive things that could be done through automation. So that's really all I can offer on that.
Well, and I think you sort of hit the nail on the head with the key word here, which is automation. And I am a fan of automation, and I think we can do a lot better than we have been, and I think there's a lot of growth potential in the use of automation techniques and technologies to sort of help with this. But I really feel like you can't automate yourself out of this hole, right? There's got to be somebody that is looking at the data and applying human level intelligence to it to really start benefiting at the top levels, and that is a struggle. It's a consistent struggle that we've seen over and over again, and again, this survey this year sort of brought that right back to light. We are really struggling with getting people and getting those skills, and SANS is trying. I can certainly speak for SANS. We've got a course around this. A lot of us in various disciplines within the SANS faculty are sort of tied in a number of ways into CTI, but it's still a struggle, and I think it's going to continue to be for at least a while. So I'm going to wrap us up here and hand it off to the other folks here with us on the webcast, but I'll just sort of reiterate that, hey, the news generally is pretty good. I mean, we're seeing a lot more people use this stuff. We got a lot more people planning to use this stuff. We've still got some problems. We can't integrate as well as we want to. We definitely still feel like there's some immaturity in the tools and technology. We still need more automation. Right? And tries to just sort of nail that one on the head again. And maybe the biggest problem, we're still having trouble finding that staff. And hopefully we'll see that improve in the coming years. So Travis, it's all yours, man.
Hey, thanks a bunch, Dave. Yeah, this is really kind of a great lead-in to, what I wanted to talk about today, and that is the struggle. This whole problem of operationalizing threat intelligence so that we can make use of it is really what I want to talk about. So, let's go pull some information from the survey that, I think is very positive. Certainly, people are seeing value in threat intelligence. These are some pretty big numbers. Helps improve security posture, 78%. That's a huge thing. Visibility is a big piece of any cyber threat intelligence program, and that's reflected in 72% of respondents saying that they're seeing improved visibility. Being able to detect otherwise unknown threats, things that might get missed by your other security apparatus in your organization, being able to leverage threat intelligence to be able to sort of surface those things, it's huge. Improving detection accuracy, reducing your time to identify and respond. These are all really good things for any security program. And the fact that, the respondents to this survey, saw that threat intelligence was having these kinds of positive impacts in those programs is huge. So the value's there. The struggle, though, is that it's really a lot. Dave kind of alluded to this, a little bit, that we've got all kinds of moving parts to doing threat intelligence properly. You've got different sources of data that you really kind of need to bring together. This is, your internal logs, any external logs, especially with things moving to the cloud and having to, be able to get some visibility there. You've got all kinds of security tools all over the place. They don't necessarily talk well together, or they produce logs in different formats that you still really want to have that information somewhere where you can leverage it for threat intelligence purposes. And then, of course, there's the threat intelligence feeds themselves, and these come in varieties of different ways as well. Sometimes they're, XML-based feeds. Sometimes they're, more JSON-style feeds. They might be reports, or maybe it's just even going to a portal and then having to sort of manually call through information. And of course, you want to enrich this information. Being able to leverage really cool, technologies like passive DNS to be able to sort of give more information to the analysts, to improve understanding and visibility of what's happening, who is kind of a no-brainer for anything that you see coming in. But then, of course, the analysts themselves being buried with all this stuff and maybe not having the background or the skills to be able to do it. So all of this comes down to lack of time and funds. So the operations side, trying to bring all this stuff together is really the challenge. How do you take all this stuff, put it in one place, make sure that it's automated as much as possible, and integrating with all the tools and platforms so you can get all the benefits that you can out of threat intelligence, being able to realize some of the value that was shown on the first slide is really where sort of the rubber meets the road. So this is really the bottom, of trying to figure all of this out, and this is the struggle. And when I was, working in an operations role, this was daily life for me. It was trying to figure out, how can I take this tool and have it talk to this and have, my internal logs that are relevant to that information in a place where my analysts can find it. And so this is where, I really enjoyed, talking to security vendors that we did business with, and really tried to push them to make really relevant APIs for us that we could leverage and, make better, sort of connectivity and in between all of our tools and stuff like that. Being able to enrich data, being able to somehow automatically pull in who is data, leveraging passive DNS, those kinds of things, so that, basically the end goal is having an analyst sit there and have everything he needs right in front of him so he can make quick decisions and, be able to make efficient analysis. That, to me, was the, where we were trying to get. So with all of that, I think this is where the struggle is. This is what we need to be looking for, is trying to find things like a threat intelligence platform. It could be homegrown stuff, anything that's going to help with automation to try to be able to whether it's in the SIM or somewhere else. That's really kind of where we need to go. So that's my message, and I want to go ahead and pass it over to Rebecca, who will be taking things from here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Travis. I think you hit the nail on the head with a lot of the issues that we're having and the need for technologies that are going to support being able to actually act and use intelligence. And one of the struggles that we consistently see folks have is this concept of indicator overload. Because when a lot of organizations first started approaching threat intelligence, we took the mindset that, more is better. If 10 indicators are good, then 100 is clearly, 10 times better. But we found that it's actually really hard to first of all, ingest a high number of indicators, but it's even harder to act on them. And this year's survey results kind of told that consistent theme that we've been seeing. So if we have only a small number of indicators that we can act on, and if indicators really are the operationalizing arm of intelligence, how do we identify what's important, and how can we be intentional about focusing in on the things that are going to have the most impact for us? And so there are three key questions that we can ask, which are, should we act on this? Can we act on this? And then what exactly is this? So should we act on this has three factors. Timing. Is this recent? Is this something that's current? Can I build a detection around it because it's an ongoing campaign that's happening now? Or is this, the analysis of an incident that happened 6 months ago? And in that case, it's not that the information's not useful, just maybe not in a detection capability. Maybe we need to pass that off to the IR team or go back and look through our logs for the time period that actually the activity occurred. And then target, who's being targeted? Is this someone who is in our industry vertical? Do they use similar technologies to us? Is there any sort of commonality? Is there anything that would make us believe that we're at risk from this same threat? Because a lot of times we get intelligence that covers the gamut, especially if we are looking at open source or things that are public. So we need to actually go through and read through the report, like Dave and I talked about earlier, to make sure that it's something that's relevant to you. And then technical details. All of these cyber attacks involve some sort of exploitation of technology. Even if it's a social engineering, they still have to get to that underlying technology. So if we're able to identify what's actually being targeted, we can say, okay, do we use this? And if so, is it vulnerable on our networks? And that should help us figure out whether this information is relevant to us. The second thing that I think we often overlook is, can we act on this? Is this something that we are actually technologically capable of detecting and responding to? If not, and it's something that's important, then we can use that to build a case for more funding that can get us the technologies we need. Do our policies allow us to take this sort of action or do these kinds of searches or queries to find this malicious activity? And then authority. At the end of the day, if we have intelligence, we need to be able to act on it. So if the individual analyst doesn't have the authority to act on it, do they know who to talk to make sure that they're able to act and to respond? So indicators should be compatible with our detection technologies, and again, something you are allowed to and able to act on. And it's important to find this out ahead of time. This is one of, I think, the key questions that if somebody is working with threat intelligence, they should know what their limits are. And then what exactly is this? If we've determined that, yes, this is something that's relevant and it's important to us and we are able to act on it, what is it? And this involves that additional layer of analysis that we also talked about. Don't just pull out individual IOCs and say, okay, here's some bad IPs, let's alert on those. Let's understand what they're related to. Let's look for what other activities might we expect to see on our network that would kind of validate the fact that yes, we did have communication with these malicious IP addresses. And some of these are going to be more actionable than others, and some of them are going to be longer lasting. A phishing email with a subject, if we see that a week from now, we'll probably still have a fair level of confidence that it is malicious, and we can continue to alert and block that, as compared to IP addresses, which are get stale much faster. So having the full picture of what's going on, which involves a lot of analysis, it's harder, and it does involve time and personnel and training to be able to do this. But this is what's going to be able to allow us to figure out how we should be focusing on intelligence and how we should act on it. We all have limited capabilities, and we need to be able to focus our detection or response efforts on intelligence that's most relevant and that we can most efficiently operationalize. And with that, I will pass it over to Alan.
Thanks, Rebecca. So I wanted to, if I can progress the slide. There we go. So I wanted to, I think there's a lot of great information in this survey, it's quite comprehensive. I think there's some key best practices that I would like to, reiterate, as others have already said. Relevance of threat intelligence to what you're trying to protect is one of the kind of building blocks that you should be focused on. One of the survey, statements was around the team starting to shift towards intelligence gathered internally or created internally. I think that speaks to that ultimately they're struggling to see, okay, what external indicators may be out there and what relevance does that have to my assets or my capabilities that I'm trying to protect. And so I think when you start looking at threat intelligence and how to raise up the quality, start to consider, is the data accurate, first of all? Does it represent information that is collected correctly? Does it have all of the information that I can act on? So is it not just, let's say, an IP address, but say potentially what malware or what botnet or what protocols are being used to cause infection? Does the information that I'm gathering have TTP information, so therefore I can use that information to not just act on a specific indicator but have a more broad response to that threat. The second thing is when you start to consider relevance, you need to start considering what business impact, as I mentioned earlier. So for example, do you care about supply chain? Most businesses now have third-party relationships where a large part of their potential software services that they leverage or the capabilities are actually provided by an external entity. What visibility do you have into those businesses and practices that they're performing to secure their environments? So should you be gathering that information about them as well as your own environment? So those are some of the key things that you want to consider for quality intelligence. The second part of it, taking relevant threat intelligence is where do I action on it? As my colleagues on the call have said, ultimately you want to try and automate as much as possible. So what does that automation mean to your environment? Obviously, you want to be able to trust the automation. So it's not just the nuts and bolts of connecting two APIs together, it's also what does the data represent, and therefore you need to understand where the automation is working, what is it actually doing in terms of analysis, understanding how the analysis is coming to results that you can then start to build up that trust and therefore act on it without necessarily having a human in the loop. One of the key things that the survey reiterates clearly is that when you have such a low number of indicators that are actually able to be acted on, that's okay for maybe a human being, but as the indicators go up, you need to consider where to automate and how to reduce that human load so that they can focus on the truly threatening aspects rather than having to look at a large number of indicators. The final thing on automation and actionable intelligence is really you need to be looking at how you override behavior, not necessarily having to do every single indicator or every single piece of intelligence. You need to be able to override, obviously, but you don't want to have to do that every single indicator, because as the data increases, which obviously will continue to be the case, you need to be looking at automation to reduce that workload on the few staff that you have. Then finally, as threats are occurring in the matter of hours, not days or weeks. So domains are stood up and then used to send spear phishing, to stand up malware that ultimately is then used to, infect systems that accidentally or mistakenly click on spear phishing emails, for example. So the ability to have intelligence where you're seeing those information within a matter of hours that then pushed into your mitigation devices automatically is really, really important. And so if you consider that no human being necessarily has the time to necessarily be looking at that on a minute-by-minute basis, you need to consider how to build that into your SecOps operations. As this survey chart shows, security operations is one of the primary groups that are leveraging CTI. However, as everybody probably knows on this call, they are doing lots of different things. They're not just focused on CTI. So how can CTI complement and help your security operations rather than requiring dedicated knowledge or dedicated time? And with that, I will pass it off to our Q&A section and hand it back to the organizers.
All right. Well, thanks for that great presentation. We have some questions ready for the Q&A. However, if anyone has a question for our presenters, please enter it into the questions window now. And I want to apologize, there's a tree trimming service out my window right now. This first one's for Dave. Are firms actually learning from CTI, or is it just the false sense of security you get from the whack-a-mole?
So, yeah, I think that's a pretty good question, and I think at least from my experience, I think people are learning a little bit from CTI. I don't think that they're learning a lot all at once. I think people are starting to put together patterns, and they're starting to realize as they go hunting and looking, and sort of to some of the points just made by my co-presenters. What they're trying to do is figure out better ways of doing things, and I think, look, let's call it what it is. If CTI gives them almost an excuse to do that, they're finding ways to get better indicators, to put those to use, to perhaps automate some things. Sure, they're learning about the adversary. Sure, they're learning about tactics, but at the same time, they're also finding out a lot about their own environments and how best to represent that across the spectrum of, prevention, detection, and response. So I would say the answer is yes, but maybe in ways people didn't realize.
All right, thanks. This next one is for Travis. We've had our CTI program running for a while now, but mostly seems to be reactive to attacks we see. I would love to get to proactively stopping malware with my CTI. Management would love it, actually. But how can I turn CTI into something proactive?
Well, this is kind of the million-dollar question. Really the promise of being proactive with threat intelligence is something that I think can be elusive, but it's certainly possible, and I think there was some hints in the survey that sort of indicated that people were seeing some successes here. Really, I think as any threat intelligence program sort of matures, naturally that visibility that they have is going to lend itself to getting really kind of a really good understanding of situational awareness and the types of attacks that are seen and different actors that seem to be coming, regularly and stuff like that. And there becomes naturally proactive things that can be done to block, and prevent things ahead of time. But specifically, I think, seeing the same types of malware, exploit kits and stuff, and getting really to know those, and being able to write YAR rules that will proactively detect, hey, this pattern of URL matches what is known to RIG exploit kit or whatever. Also being able to proactively scour for similar domains to your own, and note that when some of them get stood up that look very similar to your own domain that might be used in a phishing attack, and being able to block that as soon as you see it. These are some things that could be done that could lead to sort of being proactive and preventing attacks.
Rebecca or
Yeah,
Alan,
I'd
would
just
you
like
like to
to
add?
add.
Oh, go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, in addition to the great points that Travis made, I think looking at what you're trying to protect, and not just the systems, but the people and the tools and the applications that they use. I think understanding and having a better understanding where those vulnerabilities lie will help inform what you look for in threat intelligence. A concrete example might be, if the people that are working in your organization, their credentials are, breached or exposed, then knowing that so that you can then take proactive steps to either, change their passwords more frequently, change how they are, acting in terms of their cybersecurity awareness. Those types of things help ultimately stop the infection actually occurring in the first place if you take a more proactive stance.
And then I'll just add that it's very difficult to prove a negative. It's hard to go into your management and say, hey, nothing happened today because of CTI, and that's a good thing. So trying to understand what metrics you can capture when you move from reactive to proactive to actually tell the story of how you're making an impact and how the fact that something not happening is success for you.
All right, thank you. Rebecca, we'll start with you with this next one. How does an organization determine what intelligence sources to focus on?
That's a great question. I love talking about intelligence sources, and I think this is one of the cases where you actually need to start not by looking at what sources are available, but by looking at what types of information your organization needs to do their job more effectively. And whether you're going to be supporting incident response, whether it's going to be a SOC use case where you're doing kind of network detection, but start mapping out what your pain points are, what your intelligence gaps are, what things you want to know more about, and then go down and start looking for intelligence sources that are going to provide you that information that you need. And then if you identify gaps, like I just cannot find a source that meets my needs, that's when you can start reaching out to others' information sharing groups, seeing if maybe there are additional ways to approach that gap that you have where you could meet your needs.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, in addition to Rebecca, once you've got intelligence, how do you measure the accuracy or how do you measure the effectiveness of it? I think, putting in place a way to measure that concretely, how many indicators are being acted on that resulted in a positive action to either mitigate or block something, and having the ability to measure that concretely and then provide reports up to both your own management chain, but potentially people who are looking to fund further investment will go a long way to making sure that this intelligence is actually providing value.
And it can change as well. Just because something's a good source of intelligence to you now doesn't mean it will be forever. So I think being able to capture some of those metrics Alan talked about will help you understand when something needs to be tweaked and when your collection needs to change.
Yeah, totally agree, Rebecca.
All right, thanks. All right, this next one is, we'll start with Alan. Clearly, CTI is being used across a broad cross-section of organizations. What are some of the challenges organizations face when operationalizing CTI?
So I think we've kind of touched on some of this already. One of the key things, if you work in an environment that has industrial control systems, for example, or you're a financial industry where you are responsible for securing ATM machines, the intelligence that you gather and the aspects of that intelligence that apply to an industrial control system may not be the same or as effective as if you apply to ATM. To that earlier question we were just talking about, which intelligence matters. I think first of all, start to characterize your business and then characterize what intelligence can help protect that is a key part of what a CISO needs to consider. I think that the other thing is really consider methods to vet the data. So don't just take the data as is. Consider exploring and understanding how to validate the data that you're receiving is actually accurate, it covers what it needs to, it's timely, all of those things that I think we've mentioned earlier in the call. I think this will help drive a broad section across the organization.
All right, Travis or Rebecca, do you have anything to add?
Nope, I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, I think you did a good job of articulating that.
All right, great. Well, with that, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Dave, Rebecca, Travis, and Alan for your great presentation. And to Anomaly, Arbor Networks, Domain Tools, LookingGlass, Rapid7, and Threat Connect for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, you can visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.